I saw these two gentlemen. One had a Russian accent, the other one had like a maybe a German accent, and they were shopping for clothes with a group of Dominican, like 3 or 4 Dominican women, and I was just so curious about what was happening. Because there was a study that came out of the University of Lausanne, actually about these networks, and they are very multinational. There are, of course, the family members who tell you about these things, but there are recruiters. There are recruiters as well. So all of these interacting at the same time have made this possible. So I'm particularly interested about questions dealing with experience, how people experience things, and what particularly experiences of inequalities. So for me, this study is really about how Dominicans have, experienced their process of adaptation and assimilation to Swiss society. That's like the larger question, and I would like to know how this compares to Spain and the United States. That's like the larger scope, but that's not what we'll do today. Today, I'll just focus on this particular part here about how they articulate their sense of belonging to Switzerland. Because why belonging? First, there is this idea that I experienced, in Switzerland, that the Swiss context really represents a very different context of migration for Dominicans, for anybody, because of what Switzerland is like as a country. But, seeing a rural Dominican woman living in Zurich, or dancing in a bar in Geneva, or a Dominican man as a disc jockey. By the way, if you wonder, how about those 25% men? How do they get there? Few of them through marriage, but there's a permit that allows them to come as disc jockeys. That tells you again. Yes, a Dominican citizen, they cannot use the L permit, by the way. It was suspended last year in January of 2016. It was suspended for certain nationalities, including the Dominican Republic, Thailand, and Russia, and other ones. It's not totally suspended. It's just suspended for certain nationalities because after a study, by the way, I know the study, I know the people who did the study, they found evidence of trafficking. And feminist groups and human rights groups lobbied a lot on this issue in Switzerland, and what they did not get rid of it completely. They just sort of stopped it for certain nationalities, and that now Dominican women are in that list of groups that in Russian women and Thai women. But it's just really one respondent told me in the interview, Swiss are from, the idea that we have that men are from, the very wrong idea, by the way, but that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's like this idea that Dominicans go to Switzerland to a context that is linguistically, culturally, and I am very interested to see how they adapt to this context. But in why belonging? Obviously, Switzerland is not the only country that's receiving immigrants that are non-European, right? That has been the case of Europe. Switzerland has a long history of migration, but most of these immigrants came from Europe, from Portugal, Italy, Spain, so they were still Europeans. It is now, and through the process of allowing, refugees in the 50s, actually in the 50s they were getting Hungarians as well, and Czechs. So it is more later, the last 30 years, that they've been receiving immigrants that are from Africa, so many of them as refugees, or from East Asia, Latin America, and in the Caribbean. And one question that is being raised in integration is a very heated political issue in Europe, across Europe. The integration of Muslims. How integrated are French Muslims to French society? How French are they? We should be asking these questions, right? In Switzerland, the same happens with non-European, people who are in Switzerland who are of non-European origin. So this is a very political topic. And it is something that I'm very interested, because I think the dynamics of inequality transpire in the dynamics of belonging. It's like the dynamics of belonging and the dynamics of inequality are intertwined. And I wanted to see how exactly that happened. So in connection to belonging, I have three particular questions. How do Dominican immigrants describe their sense of belonging to Swiss society? And in articulating these notions of belonging, which distinctions they draw between themselves and the Swiss society, the Swiss majority and others? And how is the context of reception involved in their sense of belonging? Or in other words, how the context of reception influence their strategies of belonging, their sense of belonging.
Is there a prevalence of a particular part of Switzerland that come to Dominican Republic?
Mostly from the German part of mostly German Swiss.
And how does that relate in particular with what's going on politically in Germany right now? That they had to re-elect the president?
Yes, they did. But that's a good question because it is most Swiss that come to the DR come from the Swiss part of Germany, and 63, 64% of Dominicans who live in Switzerland are in German-speaking cantons. So there's like a German connection. And talking to my Swiss colleagues, the University of Neuchâtel, I hear there are like these conversations. Oh, this is more like anecdotal, but it's, I think, information about dynamics that are at play in Switzerland, in which the cantons that are more active in, anti-immigrant activities, anti-immigrant proposals, are from German cantons. So you hear the people from the French-speaking cantons, kind of like you hear something like this. I'm going to make this not an academic thing, but more like a gossip kind of thing. It's like, those German cantons, they are the ones that are more anti-immigrant. They want all these referendums on immigration. But it seems like all these people visiting and going around and bringing women here and bringing men here come from there. Like there's this notion that it's like there's this hypocrisy, basically, like the German part of Switzerland where they are the tough ones and everything, but they are the ones who marry more binational marriages and all this other stuff. The prostitutes, the sex workers, so there's like an interesting thing there.
That pretty much tells that they are looking for submissive women, and that's what bugs me, because that's lack of education. I think it all boils down to that, to just making education more accessible to people in the more rural parts of the countries.
Yes, well, that's
making education sexy, making the cultural aspect of the countryside. If we make that appealing, like you would a shopping mall. Well, everything relative, but if you make work in the land more brassy kind of thing, more appealing to the eye.
It's interesting because one of the main problems of Yvonne Riano she's Colombian. She teaches at the University of Bern. I stay in touch with her, of course. We met in Switzerland a few times, and she's the one doing study about de-skilling. Not all the women who come to Switzerland married to Swiss citizens have the profile that I explained to you. There are many women who are educated. I met many of them from Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and they are actually very educated women. The problem in Switzerland is that educated women of any nationality who marry Swiss men, de-skilling is one of the main problems. It is almost impossible for you to reinsert yourself. Way more difficult than here in the United States because of how the education system works. You follow these tracks, man, and you can get out of those tracks. And if you are an outsider trying to even get into, it's very difficult. It is not impossible, but it is very, very difficult. So the educated ones, those who actually have education, then have the de-skilling problem. And Switzerland is a very interesting country, especially studying gender and gender dynamics. I don't know how to label it because things are always more complicated than we social scientists can actually convey. But Well, women got the right to vote in 1970, like 1976, like late 70s in Switzerland. And the vast majority of the women, like 3/4 of the women in the labor force, are part-time because there's no health care. The Swiss woman who wants to have a child knows that she's gonna go part-time. Most of the women, many of the women that I met, they were part-time. And I know, because I was there doing a visiting position at the University of Neuchâtel, and I remember seeing particularly like the staff, they would come early in the morning and 3 hours later they were gone, and I'm like, what's going on? And that was part of the learning curve of me learning about the country and how it works. It's a very gender, I don't want to use the label conservative, but you'd be surprised of how still very traditional gender roles in Switzerland and women in the workplace. I mean, it's really a part-time proposition, especially for those who want to be mothers. And let me say that Switzerland has one of the highest rates of binational marriages in Europe. So it's not just Dominican. There are all kinds of Swiss that they marry women who are not Swiss from other countries. Yes?
When you're talking about the gender relation, so actually gender roles, are they policed? I mean, it seems like a sort of structure is set up to keep certain people on a certain gender role track.
I'm talking particularly about in the labor market. And you ask, are they pleased? I cannot answer that question if they are pleased. I haven't studied particularly how they feel. But I would bring attention to context. It's a society with, particularly for the native Swiss, it's very wealthy. There are a lot of protections for Swiss citizens. High levels of education. So I'm not talking about these vulnerable women who are doing part-time. Even with part-time work, they make a lot of money. They make good money because Swiss, again, wages are among the highest. That's why you see people leaving Germany, leaving France, leaving the UK to work in Switzerland. Americans, it's like number 3 or 4. There are like, 30,000, 40 Americans. I run into American expatriates. They are all over the place working in Switzerland because they attract, highly educated people from all over the world. So wages are high. So I don't want to give you the idea that these are part-time women struggling, like we would say, many women in service jobs here who are doing part-time work. They have 2 and 3 part-time jobs with no benefits, because that's really not the scenario. It's just, I guess, the ideology of motherhood and work still at play, and the society has not accommodated women in a way that allows for women who want to do both. You see, but and they have a strong women's movement in Switzerland, and so I would just be hopefully I didn't want to convey that they are these vulnerable women over there, because they must be among the wealthiest women in the world just by being Swiss. And I'm talking about the native Swiss women, because the interesting thing is that those immigrants actually play a role for those women who are able to do both. Dominicans are not just in the sex industry now. Things have diversified. I actually went to work to Dominican women including one who had a degree in computer science from OIM. And she was taking care of, there is this very rich, this is in the French part of Switzerland, they have like these Swiss chalets, and she and a Cuban woman, they are running like this cleaning operation, and they are cleaning this place, and they take care of their parents are still there because they have businesses, they travel a lot. So the Dominican women, while this family is doing their thing, including the wife, the women are cleaning their property and keeping an eye on their old parents. So in that way, it's very similar to what happens with Filipino women. That's why the comparative approach, I think, in migration studies is very important, because things, you see these patterns that I think is important for theoretical work, because you sort of confirm certain things across cases. This is very similar to Filipino women, right?
Speaking of yourself, Pereña's work,
Yes.
Talked about them, like immigrants from the Philippines going, and then they would be decades in Italy. So my question
Yes.
was, are Dominican women, they're leaving and sending money back, but are they going back and forth?
There is back and forth. And Rachel, this is like another talk.
Well, I don't want to derail
Um,
you. Go ahead.
I'm telling you, I was telling Keith, a colleague of
Keith
you,
McNeil, a scholar
that
of Trinidad. And
this Swiss case, actually, I started with Swiss and Spain as one single case, and I am changing my strategy, and this will be one book in itself because I just can't deal with Switzerland alone. Switzerland is like, I have to pull my hair, so like this country is so complicated, because it is. And back and forth, yes. I interview Dominicans that were actually about to leave. But many leave and then they come back. How can I put this? There is this marriage sexual market that I saw Dominican women fulfilling in Spain and Switzerland and in Italy. I saw a lot of all Swiss guys, and this was also mostly in the German part of Switzerland. There is this demand, sexual, romantic, companionship, all of this. Men who are lonely, who they are divorced or whatever, or they are widow. And if you wonder what kind of men are doing this, I mean, not all of them are these kind of men, but I could see those dynamics of, and you know, men in certain situations who need companionship, they find that in immigrant women, African women too, by the way, not just Caribbean women. I saw that like African women, refugee women. But there's this other thing that among the younger Dominicans, Rachel, there is this back and forth of Dominican women who go back home because they feel lonely in Switzerland and they are having partners in the DR. And I found that a lot of, I saw that very common. They are in Switzerland and they have their life, but they are having these affairs, sexual affairs, romantic affairs, or even they go there, especially those who have citizenship, which is very difficult in Switzerland, and they can manage to bring someone. They are marrying Dominicans. Because first, to be honest, many of them married for papers to get out of the L permit, right? So they really marry. These were very complicated interviews, by the way. They marry, the person that was more willing or ready to marry them and then get them out of the L permit. Because when you have the L permit, you cannot work or do anything. You are in Switzerland for this and only this. So. But then once they are independent, things happen. So there are all these dynamics that are involved about who returns and who stays there, and who wants to come back. And I felt like there is this romantic, sexual realm that is also very interesting, because if you see what people have in mind about the Caribbean and sex and romance and love and marriage and all this stuff, it's very interesting, but there are all these dynamics that are not just economic, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. There are all these, who already has a Dominican man waiting for them there, and is the Swiss husband thing working out, and if it's not, yes, sorry.
These marriages are, for the most part, marriages of convenience.
Many are, and the women would tell you,
Okay.
but not all.
Okay. And my second question is, have you talked to these Swiss men who have gone to the Caribbean and are pulling these women to
I'll tell you why I'm laughing.
And I guess where I'm coming from is to what extent is their behavior informed by that literature that underlines how certain women of African ancestry show what is exotic.
What's your name again?
I'm Philip Howard.
Philip, let me tell you why I laugh. Because you asked me if I interview Swiss. I went to this house to interview the woman. And the husband came, you have to interview me because, so there were actually Swiss men who wanted to, and they wanted me to explain things. There's a huge cultural difference. This must be the most difficult marriages. I mean, Rachel, you've been to the DR, and some of you know at least scholarly the country. It's really, I mean, it's very, very different. And as you said, the expectations also, I notice, are very different because for the women who have divorced Swiss men, one complaint was lack of understanding, particularly when it comes to their ties to the Dominican Republic. It's like, many of these men marry Dominican women out of those fantasies that you mentioned, right? Remnants of colonial mentalities. And so they go there and they have this idea that they are going to bring this wife, and they know that these women are poor. Not all of them, by the way. I interviewed one woman who's called the First Lady of Neuchâtel. Neuchâtel is a French canton, and she's Dominican. She married the richest man of the French part of Switzerland. And she's actually a professional woman. So there's a little bit of everything, but he went there to a resort and met her like that. But going back to your question, it's just many of the men don't understand. They see, oh, I saw how poor you were, and now you are in Zurich. Why don't you just sort of leave your life behind? But that's not why many of the women marry. They wanted to marry to make some money. Some of the men don't want them to work. And send money back home, because many of the women have kids. Even if they were young, they already have children. So you see these tensions that emerge of this Dominican woman. Now she's in Switzerland, but she's not like, oh, now I'm having the great life. I'm going to sit down and live in this wonderful chalet. No, they want to come. They want to work. They want to send money because they are poor, and that's actually why they wanted to migrate in the first place. So you see conflict around this issue. And you see, I actually, I'll stop there, but you get, so there's the cultural thing. There are the gender expectations that they just don't go, because you wanted to marry a submissive person, and this person actually saw this migration as an opportunity to do things that you haven't done. And there are age differences. And also, there's a lot of domestic violence I felt in many of these cases. I interviewed a woman who actually, I found so many cases of all kinds, including homicide. There was this woman that she wanted to stay working, and he poisoned her. Yes, and he killed himself as well, but this was in the Italian part of Switzerland. And I met this Dominican woman, and she told me this in the interview, that she didn't want to have kids. But this man didn't have kids, and he wanted kids. And, you know, and she had 3 kids, and it was just, I was in pain hearing her saying how I had 3 children that I didn't want to have. Mm-hmm. And so these are very complicated relationships. The divorce rates are high, and you see all the issues that you can imagine they transpired. You know, in a quote unquote normal relationship, bringing 2 people together is always complex. And imagine when you bring, and this, but I'm sorry, I think the 2 of you were raising your hand. I know.
So you said a lot of the times these unions often divorce and divorce because of lack of communication. I wanted to know if, first of all, have you ever seen a show called 90 Day Fiancé? It's on TLC.
No.
They basically talk about like the K-1 visa here in the U.S., how you bring your significant other to get married within the 90-day format. A lot of the times these couples go through a lot of tribulations because they came to America for their significant other, but also they came to work to send money back home. Did you ever come across any instances of husbands feeling jealous for, I had a feeling, of their wives for trying to work or working and sending money back, or asking their husbands to send money back to their family? Because I saw a lot of that, and like lack of understanding as to like why they would try to do something like that.
All of the above. All of the above. And also, you know, it's interesting because there seem to be, I guess maybe we should just, this will come up later, but because it's a small, you know, there's like this word of mouth now that supposedly Swiss men have become smart. Like, they are not going to fall into the trap of Dominican women anymore. Because there have been all these cases of things that have happened. I hope you get what I'm trying to say with that. It seems like there have been cases of, Dominican women who really just use many of these men. And I had women telling me, now, before things started to change in the year 2000, the women who came first, we were like grateful, and we came, like there's this boundary in the narrative about, there are so many boundaries, I cannot even get to that, about the boundaries around Dominicanness. And one boundary is a moral boundary. Not just boundaries, which is the focus of this, will be Dominican and Swiss. But this is a different paper, by the way, about intra-ethnic group boundary making. And there are moral boundaries, many moral boundaries. And one of them is those who came, before the year 2000 were like, we were grateful and they behaved well and they came and did this and stayed with their husbands. It's a narrative. I'm not saying it's accurate or not, it's a narrative. And now these other women who have come later, it's like they are players and all of, so you see that. And there's also, of course, a moral boundary about those who came as prostitutes and those who came